it was a beautiful, beautiful concert last night. I want to thank you all for it. Yesterday morning on the way back from the class, after, the choir had sung, when someone in the car mentioned how beautifully the choir had sung, Swami, his eyes teared up and he said, it's like looking at a bunch of angels. And he really meant it. So behave that way. One time, a disciple said to Master, Master, when I see you, I see Divine Mother. And Master didn't deny it. He tapped him with his cane and said, then act accordingly. So it's a very real truth that everything is dependent upon consciousness. And if we hold a high consciousness of ourselves and a vision of others in that same way, it's a very short step from the holding of that as an affirmation to it becoming a reality. It's one of the great secrets of cooperative communities, of spiritual communities, of Ananda especially, is the group holding each other at a high level of consciousness, at a high vision. And so it is very, very good to have the thought when we're looking at each other that we are indeed seeing a group of angels. There was a beautiful story about a monastery, and the monastery was losing members until finally there were just 4 old members left. And the head of the monastery was feeling badly about this. And nearby was a very well-known rabbi, and they were friends. And so he went to the rabbi and asked his advice, and the rabbi said, I just don't know what to say. You're losing members? I really don't have any advice for you. Just do the best you can. And the friar was about to leave. The rabbi said, except for one thing, one of you in that monastery is the Messiah, is a savior. And just kind of nonplussed the abbot of the monastery, but he went back and he reported it to the other 3 members. And they all began to think, well, I know I'm not a great saint like that, but maybe it's Brother Elias here. Maybe he is, and he's just been hiding it. And Elias thought maybe it's Brother Thomas, and each thought maybe the other was, and they began to treat each other that way. And pretty soon that magnetism began to attract others to come, and others were treating them in that way. And gradually, in fact, quite rapidly, the monastery filled up with young people wanting to live in this way. And so the consciousness that we have is very, very important, even if it starts as affirmation. It's one of the fundamental aspects of our teachings. This morning, Devi and I are going to talk about certain principles that built Ananda. And I, in fact, want to talk specifically about 3 principles. The first being attunement, the second being satsang, and the third being non-attachment. But I want to start by talking about attunement because attunement underlies everything, and it is the primary principle. In fact, the whole universe is built to a certain extent on the basis of attunement. So we have to ask, attunement with what? Well, you might say attunement with God, but in fact, attunement with God, we're not quite ready for that step yet. We don't understand it. Swami went out and gave a series of talks that he called the Joy Tour. And after a while, he stopped talking about joy because his audience didn't understand the concept of it yet. And he had to ratchet it down a little bit and talk more about happiness because that they could understand. But bliss, they weren't ready for. it reminds me of a story of George Washington Carver. And he used to go out early in the morning. I think most of you know who he was. He was a great saint and a great botanist around the turn of the century, and just transformed the economy of the South. Very noble, black-skinned person. And he used to go out in the mornings for his walks out in the woods, and he would look at the plants and talk with them, and he would talk with God. And he would hear God talking back to him. And one morning he said, he wrote this in his autobiography. He said that one morning he said, God, why did you create the world? And he heard clear as a bell the answer come back, George, that's too big of a question for you. And then he said, well then, God, why did you create me? And he said, he heard clear as a bell, George, that's better, but it's still too big of a question. Then he said, God, why did you create the peanut? And God responded, George, now you've got one you can work on. And he went on to find some 200 uses for the peanut, and it transformed the economy of the South, uplifted the lives of millions of people, and his consciousness was like that. He said that everything in nature will speak to you if you love it enough. And that was the secret of, it's the secret of his knowledge, but it's the secret of all the great saints. Everything in the world will speak to you if you love it enough. Now, let's ask the question, why isn't God speaking to us? What's the answer? We don't love him enough. We got other things that we're paying attention to, that we're busy about, that we're wanting to have, wanting to accomplish. You know, the whole world would be transformed if we would change one basic question. Mostly, we're asking the world, what can I get? If we would change that question, I mean, look at advertising, look at commerce, look at mass media, look at the conversations, look at the groups that you're in. Isn't everybody that you know basically striving to get something or get somewhere or have something or keep something that they have? Isn't that like the driving force of what's going on in the world? If we would change that one question from what can I get to what can I become, we would have the secret for very rapid progress and the secret for great happiness in our lives. So everything should be in terms of what can I become. So when we come back to attunement, we can say attunement with God, but in a sense, as I was saying with George Washington Carver, that's too big of a question. Swami, when we were driving back yesterday, we thanked him for his class, beautiful class, as we always do. And as he almost always says, God is the doer. And we said, well, God was giving a talk to us an hour before the class too, but we didn't understand it as well. God is talking to us all the time, but we have to have it in the language that we can accept, that we can hear. And so to say attunement with God is not quite good enough. We have to attune ourselves to an understandable form of God. And we can think of it like everything is consciousness. Everything is consciousness. The whole universe is made out of nothing but consciousness. God created the universe by, well, in the scriptures it says he dreamed the universe into existence. His dreams have more stability than ours do. But it's a very good analogy because we too create a universe at night when we sleep and when we dream. And that universe can be very complex. I've always thought it curious that when I have a dream, I assume it's the same truth for you. When I have a dream, there might be many characters in that dream, but I'm only one of those characters. And the others are acting out roles to me or different from me. Isn't that, do you have the same experience? Why is that? It's all coming from your own consciousness. It's all you that is creating, it's you that's creating that universe, dream universe. You that's creating every character in it, every possible little leaf on a tree if you're dreaming of a tree. And yet, somehow, the principle of ego makes it seem like you're only a small part of that dream and everything else is not you, even in your own dream. Well, that's what we're faced with in God's dream. And that is the fundamental delusion. When you wake up in the morning, you know that you are all the characters in the dream. But while you were dreaming, you don't. That's the fundamental analogy for the spiritual path. When we wake up in samadhi, in God union and self-realization, we know that we were every part of the dream and that we were somehow only thinking that we were Jyotish or Devi or Durga or Vidura. We were only thinking that we were taking on just the part of one character, but in fact, we were everything. But it's not easy. You don't wake up from a deep sleep, from a very deep sleep. You don't wake up into full wakefulness right away. There's a gradual waking process that has to happen, that you come from, call it an unconscious state, into a conscious state. In fact, in Seattle, they sell lamps to help you with this process, because with the long winters and, let us say, the moisture in the air. There was somebody, I think this was from Portland, so I'll treat the equal opportunity Northwest slurs here. Someone had a T-shirt said Portland Rain Festival, January 1st to December 31st. And so with that, they have special lamps that help you because people actually get a kind of a disease called SAD disease, seasonally adjusted disorder. And so they have lamps that gradually, about a half hour before your waking time, they very slowly begin to dim, to glow, and then they get stronger and stronger and that helps the brain come out of a deep sleep into a normal waking pattern. So we too have to come out of the deep sleep. We don't come out immediately. We don't come out quickly. How do we come out of that sleep? Well, we have to gradually gain awareness. The whole of the spiritual path. Swami, when we were in India a couple of years ago, said very succinctly to us, the whole of the spiritual path is overcoming the delusion of ego. Period. That's it. That sense of separateness, that sense that we're only one character in the dream, that's ego. Master defined it as the soul identified with your body and your personality. Your soul identifies with that rather than identifies with the wakeful state of the dreamer. And so you take on that sense that you're just one character. The whole of the spiritual path is overcoming that delusion. A corollary to that is that all pain, all suffering, all unhappiness is due to the alarming fact that you are associated with that ego, with that one So all pain, all delusion, everything that you suffer, everything that you want to get rid of or overcome or get is due to the fact that you have a sense of separateness. So how do we overcome that? Well, we can't do it quickly, but we do that by attunement. But attunement to what? Eventually, we will find out what to attune ourselves to. But it takes a long time. It's as if we're on a cross-country walk, and all you can see from any one point is the territory behind you to the horizon and the territory ahead of you to the horizon. If the goal is to get to the Pacific coast and you start at the Atlantic Ocean and you want to get to the Pacific Ocean, you start from the Sea of Bliss, you want to get to the Sea of Bliss, but in between is a long journey, seemingly a long journey. And so all you can see at any one time is the space that you're in. So part of the way that God created the workings of consciousness is that we are always modeling ourselves after something. You know, there are some geese out on the lake here. The baby geese that were born this spring are modeling after their parents. Or maybe when they get a little older, they model after the best goose in the flock. But they're modeling after a goose. They aren't trying to model after God. They aren't trying to model after Master. Their consciousness isn't big enough. George, ask another question. Their consciousness is not big enough yet to ask the question, how am I going to get free? How am I going to get liberated? And so it is. We are always modeling after something. Think of once we get onto the plane of existence of the human level, we're still constantly modeling. As we grow up, Swami may have had that very fierce, independent nature that said to his mother, and what makes you think you can teach me how to read and write? You aren't a teacher, you're only a mother. Well, but somebody had to teach him how to read and write. He could try to discover that on his own. Long, hard journey if you're going to try to do that. So you model after your teachers, you model after your parents, you model after something. You're constantly doing that. As we gradually progress along the spiritual path, what we choose to model after changes. And when I say progress on the spiritual path, Master said that everybody in the world is on the spiritual path. One time one of his disciples asked him, Master, will I ever leave the spiritual path? And Master said, how can you? Everybody in the world is on the spiritual path. But some are on it more consciously. Where does the point come that is probably the most important point in the soul's long process? We can call it the soul's evolution, but it isn't that the soul evolves, it's the consciousness that evolves. So it's the soul is like the dreamer, and you can't say that the dreamer evolves to get out of the dream. The dreamer, but the consciousness has to change. And so so we can say the soul's evolution. It's the soul identified with the personality that has to gradually wake up. And so that process, as we move along the path of greater and greater wakefulness, the most important point ever is when the soul says finally and with great sincerity, I want to know God and I want to become one with God. That's still another desire. See, everything is built around desires. Everything is built around trying to get something. Here we're trying to get realization. And one time someone said to Ananda Ma, but isn't the desire for God just another desire? And she said, yes, Yes, it is. But it is different in this aspect, that when you achieve this desire, you achieve the end of all desires. Whereas when you achieve any other desire, it just perpetuates more desire. Why does desire perpetuate more desire? Because you think that you will be happy when you achieve whatever little desire. Maybe not ultimately happy, but happier. If you feel uncomfortable in your chair, subconsciously you're going to think, well, if I move, I'm going to feel a little better. I'm going to feel a little happier. Thousands and thousands of times a day, our mind is trying to change circumstances so that we become a little bit happier. And for a moment, we are a little bit happier. But mainly, it's the achievement, it's the release of the pressure of the desire that makes us happy. So we have a desire for, for a really comfortable chair. Big, cushy, a lounger. One that you could, and if only, and imagine sitting here and you're sitting on a slightly hard chair and you're thinking of a barca lounger or whatever they call them. And you become obsessed with the idea. And you're unhappy because you don't have the barca lounger. Now I've probably planted a seed of discontent in the heart of everyone. I'm sorry. Bad example. But we've launched on it, now we're stuck. So you have this obsession to get your barca lounger. And you're unhappy until you're able to achieve that fulfillment of that desire. You get it. Now, does the barca lounger make you happy? The barca lounger doesn't. The release of the desire, for one, does. And for a little while, you're happy. Someone told me recently that they were on the spiritual path, they had a long desire to get a Mercedes. And it took them several years to earn enough money to get the income to get it. They got a Mercedes. He said, you know how long the happiness from that Mercedes lasted? 3 blocks. 3 blocks was what it lasted. And then he realized he was on to something else. And so these constant desires are there, and we're chasing after them. And the reason that the world goes on and on and on is, as Swami said yesterday, quoting Master, people are so clever in their ignorance. We can get a desire for a Mercedes, and then you can get a desire for a particular kind of Mercedes, and then a particularly model and year. You have to change, and on it goes, and how long it takes. The desire for God, however, ends in the endless calmness and fulfillment of the soul. It's because we came from the sea of bliss and we're after the sea of bliss. So we're moving along for a long time, and we're modeling ourselves after whoever is around us, wherever we are in that trek. We're modeling ourselves after the people that we're associated with and the territory that we're in and the activities that they're involved in. If you grow up in a gang, you're going to model after members of the gang. If you grow up in a normal, typical American home, you're going to be a normal, typical American speaking Minnesotan or Oklahoman, wanting to go to McDonald's, wanting to get advancement at work, a little bigger car, a little bigger, all of those things. What can I get? What can I get? Bumper sticker said, he who dies with the most toys wins. Which is not, I wouldn't say the fundamental American desire, but it's a part of it, that consumeristic aspect of it. So at any rate, the point here is that we move along, and we move along as we gradually come more and more awake. We change the group of people or the person that we model ourselves after, that we want to emulate, that we seek. We're much, much more defined by what we want to become than we are by what we are. What we are now, as we sit here today, is the result of your aspirations from past lives and from earlier on in this life. But who you are right now is gone in an instant. Who you want to become, your aspiration, is really much more your defining characteristic, because it's the direction you're headed. Let's assume now that we're all headed toward the clear, open, conscious desire to become one with God. That self-realization is, in fact, our true goal. And that the next question that is obvious is, how do we get there? And so you look at, because every aspect of life models after someone, something, we begin to look around for a model to emulate, to pattern our life after. And when we get to the point where the model becomes a self-realized master, and that is our aspiration, to become like a self-realized master, that is a great, great blessing, because that is nearly at the end of the whole journey, because all of our desires have to be achieved. Every desire has to be achieved. It's the law of the universe. And when that desire that leads to the end of desires is finally achieved, then we become completely fulfilled in the great drama of life, God's Leela, the hide and seek that He's playing through ages. Seems like for us, because we're still caught in time and space, for Him not. But at any rate, that He's playing. Finally, that game is over. Now, coming back to Ananda, because we wanted to talk about the principles that underlie the founding of Ananda, understanding that this is the process of life. When we first started the community, we didn't know very much what we were doing, but we had the inestimable blessing of Swami, and Swami having been trained by Master, and having been, it isn't just trained by Master, it's the fact that he has so beautifully, so totally tried to emulate Master, tried to model his consciousness, not his behavior. He doesn't go around talking in a fake Bengali accent. Believe me, there were people who came to the early years of Ananda who walked around talking in fake Indian accents, thinking that somehow emulating an exterior characteristic was what was important. And of course it's not. But Swamiji, more and more, has tried to attune his consciousness to Master's consciousness. A few years ago, that's probably at least a dozen years ago now, he said something that touched me very, very deeply. He said, for many, many years, I have tried to have every thought that I think in tune with Master. He said, I realize that isn't enough. He said, now I want to have every thought, every feeling, every desire, every wisp of consciousness that I have in tune with Master. And when you get a powerful mind, a powerful consciousness, a hugely strong will like Swami has, and that becomes not just a goal, the central goal, perhaps the only goal of your life, you're going to achieve it. Until in recent months and years, Swami has said, especially when he's writing and he's feeling Master's consciousness flow through him when he's writing, he says, I have difficulty knowing where Master leaves off and Kriyananda begins. He's no longer associated really with the character Kriyananda. He says, Kriyananda is an event that I feel responsible for. That's very, if you have a dream character and in your dream you're thinking, I'm not that person. I'm just responsible for his behavior here in this dream a little bit. That's very different from being caught in thinking that you're that person. Well, that's what we're after. In the beginning of Ananda, believe me, Swami may have felt that. Not very many others did. It took a long, difficult time. The most important stage of Ananda's development, without which Ananda would not exist today, was Swami holding that vision and the others gradually coming along to not just kind of copy it, but to integrate it into their own heart. Until now, I know that there are the majority of people in the audience here have the same desire that Swami did. That I know that you feel, as I do, that I want everything that I do, every action, every thought, every feeling, to be in tune with Master, to be in tune with God. And as a group of people begin to focus on that one thought, it creates a tremendous, a powerful, powerful magnetism. But in the beginning, it was really only Swamiji who held that vision clearly. And he worked primarily with those who maybe they weren't ready to accept that vision yet, but they wanted to be ready to accept that vision. I've often thought that there are a couple of stages of becoming a saint. First, you have to want to become a saint. Only after that can you truly want to become a saint. And so in the early years, the first 2 or 3 years, there were many who wanted to be completely in tune with Master, but the karma, the mind, the other desires were too turbulent. And it took some years. It took, certainly the hardest part was the first year of the community, where many people came for many different reasons. And I don't want to disrespect them, because we drew basically very good people. They were not all on the yogic path, nor were they on the, certainly not devotees of Master, but they were basically noble people. They wanted to do good things. They wanted to help the world. They wanted to somehow create a lifestyle that was different and better than the lifestyle that they saw around them. And so they did have aspirations, but many were not yet ready to try to model their life after anybody who could really teach them. In fact, 2 years into the community, there was a small group of people who decided that what Ananda really needed was a constitution. And in that constitution, there would be certain, needed rules, such as the leader of the community needed to change from time to time. That this idea of having one leader for life, that just didn't go in a democracy like America had. And in fact, that not just the overall leader, we won't use the word Swami here, the overall leader needed to move aside, but all the other kind of sub-leaders needed to move aside. And in fact, that the village manager, which was me at the time, should have a term lasting no longer than 2 years. Surprise, surprise, that term was already up. And that I and the others like me should move aside and give the new ideas a chance to go. Well, of course, the Constitution never got implemented, and the 4 people who were drawing it up left a few months later, a little huffy. But I bring it up because in the early years of the community, the most important first step was magnetizing the consciousness around wanting to be in tune with Master. First of all, wanting to be in tune with God, because that too was a question in the early years. But that pretty quickly passed. But then we did have, for a couple of years, a little bit of a battle about why just Yogananda? There are lots of saints. Why be so narrow-minded? Why be such throwbacks so that you can't see that God is everywhere? And mainly, God is down at the river. Why have to work so hard? Let's go down and worship him down at the river. And we had a lot of people who did that. Meanwhile, Swami was going out teaching classes, earning money to pay the mortgage. And so, that certain fundamental ideas had to get here. But after a couple of years, it really didn't take very long, looking back. After a couple of years, the people who thought in ways differently found out that they weren't going to prevail with their ideas. And they became convinced that they should either leave or they should get on board. And from that time on, that battle, it became firmly decided and firmly established, and the great majority were absolutely dedicated to the fact that this was a spiritual community based on Master, on discipleship to Master, and the following of his teachings, including daily meditation, Kriya Yoga, and all of the other things. From that point on, that magnetism began to grow and grow. Now, so that attunement was the first underlying principle on which Ananda was built. Without that, we would have snuffed out of existence. The second principle is kind of similar to, in India, they say the most important thing on the spiritual path is to have a true guru, a true model to emulate your consciousness after. And that, because it isn't just, the devotee's part is, yes, to try to become attuned to open up to the consciousness of the guru, to study the teachings of the guru, to not try to resist, to align our will with the will of the guru. Will, Master said, is desire plus energy dedicated in a particular direction or to a particular goal. In this case, energy plus desire for God, for attunement with Yogananda, plus the energy behind that, to align that will with the will of Master. So that was now established, at least in directional, in affirmation. That's why I started out saying that our affirmation, what we want to become, is more important than what we are. We weren't yet really there, but at least our direction, our desire was to get there. And so that became firmly established. And then the second thing that could happen once that happens, and it's traditional to the teachings, it's just the way God works in the world, is once you have the guru, it isn't just the disciples trying to learn his teachings, it's the fact that the guru then can respond with consciousness, with magnetism, with changing your consciousness. And so when we have a desire to be in tune with Master, then Master can respond with the grace that allows that to happen. Until that time, that process can't happen. Anandamoyi Ma, we went there and visited her in 1974, and we asked her to bless some beads and malas and pictures and things that we had brought from Ananda. And she said, why ask this body to bless them? Can't you see that grace is always flowing? Always flowing? It's like sunlight on a building. You don't have to pray that the sunlight shine on the building. You don't have to pray that grace flow. If you need to pray, pray that you get the wisdom to open the shutters so that the sunlight can come into the room of your mind. Pray that you open your heart so that the grace can flow into your life. And so that part of the devotee and a group of devotees all opening ourselves as well as we can, as dynamically as we could, drew the grace of Master. And when that grace, when that flow starts coming in, he guides the actions of the community. He guides the circumstances. He guides the happenings. Swami mentioned yesterday that he had these Brigu readings, and one was done according to the power of astrology. And he was recently rereading them. It was very, very accurate up to a certain point, and then it became less and less accurate. Why? Because Swami said, at a certain point, Master took over his karma and began to arrange things not according to the karmic patterns, but not according to the stars, not according to the planetary combination with which he was born, but because Swami had aligned his life with Master's. Now, in a sense, he didn't have a life anymore as Kriyananda. He had a life as an extension of Master. And to that extent that we do, we all will have a life of Master's extension, of God's extension. That is the most important thing we can do with our life, is to do that with all our strength, because then God's grace, it's opening the shutters, that light will come in, and the decisions we make, even if they're wrong, they'll quickly get corrected. Because God's grace, it's like you have a hose that's laying on the ground and coiled up. You turn a little trickle of water in, and the water gradually manages to get around to the end of the hose and dribbles out. If that's a fire hose attached to a fire hydrant, you turn the fire hydrant on. I'm talking about a big flow of energy, a big flow of grace. That energy, that grace itself will uncoil that hose and get it straight. When we open our lives to God and to Master, the power of grace flowing from Him will take care of the rest of it. We don't have to worry. The only job that we have is attuning our will to the will of God. Don't worry about the details. They'll take care of themselves. So that's the one and most important and fundamental principle that built Ananda. The second is satsang. When you get a group of people doing that together, the group magnetism becomes powerful. Our consciousness is affected primarily by magnetism, not by other things. Master said the whole world is built on the basis of magnetism. Hang around, if you want to be successful, hang around successful people and get their magnetism. Open yourself to their magnetic success thoughts. And so the interchange between satsang, sat means truth in this case, sangha means fellowship of truth, being around other people seeking the truth and having aspects of the truth that they have developed especially allows you to come back to this thought that I started with. We always model ourselves after others. Well, we need a group of people around us to model ourselves after. Not just Master, not just Swami, but others. And by seeing one person who has beautiful devotion and loves to chant, and is always, you walk into the market and you hear them and they're standing in line and they're humming a bhajan. and that devotion is always flowing. Hang around them, and your devotion will increase. Others with willpower, others with I can do it attitude, others with beautiful attunement, others with courage. Everybody in this community has helped me in some way or another. Everybody has a beautiful quality, some beautiful gift that they give to the rest of us. Love them enough and they will speak to you. Love those high qualities enough and they'll come into your own heart and they will affect you. That's satsang. And living amongst others, and I know that there are many sitting here today who don't live in community. First question is, why not? But if the circumstances are such that you can't, then at least try the best you can to associate with noble people, with uplifting people. Because we don't wake up from deep sleep, we wake up by gradually getting more and more noble consciousness, by gradually being attracted to and expressing the beautiful aspects of consciousness that Master so beautifully expressed in his life. Master said that he had 3 qualities of consciousness especially. He wrote this to Rajasi. He said, joyful awareness, wisdom, and love. Those are the 3 qualities especially that I express. Well, those are very good qualities to try to get magnetized to. If you want joyful awareness, hang around people that are joyful and affirm joy all the time, because your own thoughts are a kind of satsang too. So satsang, put yourself in association with those who have the qualities that you want and make your primary associations that. That includes music. We heard yesterday the beautiful music. You can choose to listen to music like that, or you can choose to listen to other kinds of music. Lost my wife and I lost my truck. Ain't going to get no better, you know? Only along with it is a big thumping bass, driving it into your subconscious mind. Why listen to that kind of junk? So satsang of vibration as well as satsang of company is very, very important. So attunement, satsang, and the third principle on which Ananda was based is non-attachment. And these came along kind of almost sequentially, you could say, in the development of Ananda. So non-attachment, fortunately, we were by and large young. Our hair was both more colored and longer when we came. And when you don't have possessions, you aren't very attached to them. When you can carry your possessions in a backpack, they don't seem so important. Now some friend is moving, he's ruining the fact of the mountains of material they have to move. Good thing for us would be to move about once every 2 years and know that you had to, so that you didn't accumulate too much. But at any rate, non-attachment, it isn't just possessions. Whether you have possessions or don't have possessions is basically immaterial. It's whether you're attached to that, whether you're attached to what you have, or even worse, to what you want. Saw a bumper sticker, I don't believe everything I think. Don't get attached to that which you're attached to, or that which you desire. So break away from that. And that quality was relatively easy, but also was a very strong quality at the beginning of the community. And it allowed us, because of that, to do all kinds of things. If you aren't attached to fear, you can try anything. If you aren't attached to shyness, you can get up and give talks if you have to. If you aren't, so all of those things, non-attachment to any master. Swami said that the ego, remember coming back to that character in the dream, who you are, who you think you are, is just a bundle of self-definitions. Become unattached to your own self-definitions, and you can become someone else. You can become a master. And that is the path that we're all traversing together. And it is a great, great blessing. And I thank you all from the bottom of my heart for sharing this journey with me.